Let's have a look how we can put a cherry on top of Grats. Grats is an implementation first or annotation based GraphQL server where you use your code to express how the schema should be. So you essentially infer from the code the GraphQL schema. And that is very similar to Hot Chocolate, but Grats is written in JavaScript, so you can use it in Node. Let's have a look at it. So I have an empty folder here, and we're gonna put some Grats inside of it. Grats is a schema builder that infers from your TypeScript code the actual schema representation. But the GraphQL server that we are going to use is Yoga, that is from the guild. So let's get started here. I'm pulling up my terminal and then we just do an npm init to get started. And in our package.json, we're gonna do a couple of changes. So we're gonna have a main entry point that is in dist and is called server.js. And then we down here have actually a start command. We actually don't need the test here. And that is node. And then we go to the dist and server.js. Okay, with this we are good to go. Let's add GraphQL Yoga. So we do npm install and then GraphQL Yoga. With that in, let's add the Grats to the mix. So with GraphQL Grats installed, we are almost ready to go. Next thing is to put our tsconfig in. Let me quickly do that here. And I have done a couple of changes toward the getting started guide from Grats. One is that I have here an output to dist, but apart from that, it's pretty standard. So next, let's create actually the server TS. And into the server TS, I'm just copying for now the getting started server from Grats. And you can see we have here a query type and we have here a function hello. And at the moment, I can see here that I have an error with the schema module. And for that, we have to run npx grats. So let me pull up the terminal. And actually, let's run it with watch as we're gonna change it. Okay, so this is running and you can already see that we now have a schema TS here. And we also have a GraphQL schema. So what is happening behind the scenes is actually that we are using standard GraphQL JS to build up our types. And these are the type representations actually of the code we wrote here. So you have a query type and that is being built up as a GraphQL object type here. And you can see it's called query and has a field hello. And then we are referring to the resolver that we have written. But there's also the schema generated here. And that's actually really great because you immediately see the impact of your code change in the schema. And if you use the schema as an artifact paradigm, you can just integrate it very easily in your build flow. And then each commit will show you what the code change is that you have and what the impact is to your schema. Let me actually pin the schema here to the side. And then we go here into our GraphQL server and we're going to introduce a couple more functions. So let's first introduce a simple foo function. So I'm going to create here the function. Let's call it foo. And that sits on our query type, returns also a string. And then we return here just bar. And actually nothing happens because how Grats works is by inspecting these JS doc comments here. So if I grab, for instance, this field comment here and put that on my foo resolver, then you can see immediately my schema changes and I now have here the hello and the foo. This also works with types. Let's say this actually returns a user. So I'm going to introduce here a type user, and this type user has actually a field name. And then our resolver up here is actually user by name. And then we want to introduce here arguments. So arguments I can just add here by introducing an args argument to my function here, and that gets an object here, and each of the fields I have in here translate to GraphQL arguments. So I'm introducing here the name, and then we return here actually our user. Okay, with this setup, we can just return here the actual object, and the name that we return here for the user is actually the name that we pass in on args, and then we are good to go. So there is an issue here, and that's actually here I don't have annotations, but I'm using it up here. And the Grats compiler will actually tell you that there is something wrong and that user doesn't have an annotation, so it cannot build a new schema. So what we need to do is annotate that. We can grab this type annotation here, put that on our type, and then we also have to expose this field here. So again, we put an annotation on that, and then you can see these types are now introduced into our schema. So that's really nice. I like that. that you express the GraphQL schema with your types, because most of the times you're much better with your main programming language than figuring out something in GraphQL and then also needing to matching a magic string to your types, right? It's much better to generate the schema from your types. Let's actually compile and run this thing. So I'm going here to another terminal window, and then we run the TypeScript compiler, and that actually produces here these new files, schema.js and server.js. That's the compiled JavaScript. I can have a look at it, and you can see that is basically the JavaScript representation of that. And now we can actually run it. So we're going to say npm start, and then our server is running. Let's go to our IDE, and that at the moment is the graphical interface of Yoga, and we could write a query here. But this is actually not the nicest IDE that you could get. Actually the nicest, and I'm maybe biased, so don't take my word and try it just out. So we're going to add here some banana cake pop into it to make the experience nicer. So I'm going to install just another package here, and that's the banana cake pop server adapter plugin for Yoga. And that is a new package, so I'm going to just run that. So let's go to our server TS. And then we're going to import here the module. So we're going to say use banana cake pop, and then we can seamlessly plug that into Yoga. So the first thing we got to do here is disable graphical, and then we integrate banana cake pop here. So we add it as a plugin, and we're going to say use banana cake pop, and then we are good to go. Let's compile it and then run it. And then we can go to banana cake pop, create a new document here, and then we can use the query builder to just quickly write a get hello query. So we take here hello, or we might as well just take a user here, pass in the username, and then run the query, and we get the result here. What you can also do is add environments and really configure your API settings. And for this, you just sign in. Then you can also set your theme. Like if you like a dark theme, you can just switch to the GitHub dark theme, for instance, and then you have here your APIs. I could, for instance, add here the Grats API and then say that is an API collection here. We quickly configure it, and then whatever document I have under here is actually configured to run against my local schema. I hope you like it. Try it out. It not only works with Grats, but any other Yoga-based server. And if you're using Apollo, for instance, we also have an Express integration. And with that, have fun.